Iran conflict crosses new lines. On the high seas, right at the docks of Dubai, and inside Israel's parliament. In the last 48 hours alone, Iran has reportedly struck a Kuwaiti oil tanker near Dubai, less back pressure on Tehran is tightening, and Israel's Knesset has just passed a deeply controversial law that could allow the death penalty for Palestinians who are convicted of killing Israelis. While exempting Jewish Israelis who kill Palestinians. This is not just a regional crisis anymore. What happens in the Persian Gulf and the West Bank today is shaping global energy prices, international alliances, and the moral credibility of some of the world's most powerful governments. The attack on the Kuwaiti tanker in Dubai on March 30th, a massive Kuwaiti-owned crude oil tanker, the Al Salmi, was hit while it was anchored near Dubai port in the United Arab Emirates. Reports say it was struck by an Iranian attack, likely a drone or missile, which set part of the ship on fire and damaged its hull. Importantly, no crew members were killed, and all 24 sailors were reported safe. But the fire has raised serious fears of a potential oil spill into the Gulf. For a region that already faces extreme environmental stress and sits on some of the world's busiest shipping lanes, even a small spill could mean weeks of disruption, higher cleanup costs, and long-term damage to marine ecosystems. This isn't the first time Iran has targeted commercial shipping in the past few months, but striking a Kuwaiti tanker so close to Dubai, a major global freight and logistics hub, sends a very different message. It shows that Tehran is willing to disrupt the flows of oil and trade in ways that directly affect the UAE, Kuwait, and the wider Gulf states that have tried to stay somewhat neutral, even as they quietly support the US-led campaign against Iran. How this fits into the wider Iran-US-Israel war, to understand why this attack matters, you have to zoom out. For months, the US and Israel have been running a rolling military campaign against Iran's missile infrastructure, air defense systems, command centers, and even parts of its leadership. Israel frames this as a preemptive strike against Iran's nuclear ambitions and its regional proxy network. Iran calls it an illegal war of aggression. The result has been a cycle of Israeli and US-led strikes inside Iran, followed by Iranian missile and drone attacks on Israel and its allies, from the Gulf to the eastern Mediterranean. In this context, the Dubai port attack on the Kuwaiti tanker is one more escalation in a war that is no longer just about missiles and bases. It's a direct threat to the economic lifeblood of the Gulf: oil exports, refining, and shipping, making this a hybrid war that targets both military assets and global markets at the same time. And the timing is no accident. Just as the United States and its allies are tightening sanctions and diplomatic pressure, Iran is signaling that it can hit back where it hurts most. Energy prices and global trade routes. The Strait of Hormuz and the risk of a wider blockade of Dubai attack is also happening against a bigger backdrop. Iran's growing pressure on the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which about 20 to 30% of the world's seaborne oil passes every day. Iran has warned that it could block or heavily restrict traffic through the strait, and its parliament has already approved measures that would allow Tehran to impose tolls on ships passing through. For the US and European governments, that sounds like a de facto blockade, a classic escalation tactic meant to force Washington to the negotiating table. Now, when you combine a blockade threat in Hormuz with an actual attack on a Kuwaiti tanker right outside Dubai, the message is simple. If you want to keep the Gulf open and keep oil flowing, you better rethink this war. But that's a dangerous game. Closing or choking the strait would spike oil prices worldwide, destabilize fragile economies, and trigger a massive NATO or US-led naval response. So Iran is essentially playing a high-stakes poker match where the stakes are not just regional dominance, but global inflation and energy security. Israel's death penalty bill for Palestinians now lets shift from the seas to the streets and courts of Israel and the occupied territories. On March 30th, Israel's parliament, the Knesset, passed a controversial new law that would effectively expand the use of the death penalty for Palestinians accused of killing Israelis. Under the bill, military courts would be required to impose a death sentence on Palestinians convicted of murdering Israelis in what Israeli authorities classify as terrorist acts. Critically, the law does not apply in the same way to Jewish Israelis who are convicted of killing Palestinians, a distinction that has drawn fierce criticism from human rights groups and parts of Israel's own legal community. The bill passed with 62 votes in favor, 48 against, and 1 abstention. It was spearheaded by Israel's far-right security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who celebrated its passage in the Knesset, even opening a bottle of champagne. Immediately after the vote, Israel's Supreme Court and several civil society groups petitioned judges to review and potentially nullify the law, arguing that it may violate constitutional principles and international humanitarian law. Why this bill is considered discriminatory and dangerous to criticism is not just about the death penalty itself, but about how it's being applied. First, the law applies primarily to the military courts that operate in the occupied West Bank, where the legal system is already under fire for being tilted in favor of the Israeli security establishment. Second, the exemption for Jewish Israelis who kill Palestinians creates a two-tier justice system, one set of rules for Palestinians and another, much softer. For Israeli citizens, Palestinian leaders and rights groups have called the law a war crime that violates the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits discriminatory treatment of protected persons in occupied territory. Others warn that this move could inflame tensions on the ground, fuel recruitment for armed groups, and deepen the sense among Palestinians that they live under a system that is structurally unfair and punitive. Inside Israel, the debate is almost as polarized. Supporters argue that harsher punishments are needed to deter terrorism and protect Israeli civilians after years of attacks and war fatigue. Opponents say the real deterrent is political resolution, not executions, and that the bill looks more like revenge and political theater than a serious security policy. How energy, occupation, and global politics connect on the surface, an oil tanker strike in Dubai and a death penalty vote in Jerusalem might seem like two separate crises. But together, they reveal a broader pattern. The Middle East is becoming a pressure cooker where military conflict, energy politics, and legal system discrimination all feed into each other. On one side, the US-Israel-Iran war is no longer about who can bomb whom inside Iran or Israel. It's about whether Iran can use its control over Gulf waters to force concessions, and whether the US and its allies are ready for a long, grinding war of attrition that pushes oil prices up and threatens the global economy. On the other side, Israel's move toward the death penalty for Palestinians is a domestic political choice that will shape how the world sees its occupation and its justice system. That, in turn, will influence everything from European foreign policy to how the UN Security Council reacts to the wider conflict. What this means for the rest of the world for audiences outside the Middle East, the big takeaway is that geography does not protect you from this crisis. If the Strait of Hormuz is choked or shipping becomes riskier, oil and gas prices in Europe, Asia, and the Americas will rise. If the death penalty law is used against Palestinians, it will almost certainly trigger new waves of sanctions, UN resolutions, and diplomatic showdowns. And for regional powers like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt, the challenge is clear. Stay aligned with the US and Israel, and risk being dragged into Iran's retaliatory strikes, or try to mediate and risk losing influence with Washington. Pakistan, India, and other energy importing countries are also watching closely. Any serious disruption to Gulf shipping affects not just Europe and the US, but also the growth prospects of some of the world's fastest expanding economies. Closing thoughts and call to action. What we're seeing now is not just another chapter in the long, tragic history of the Middle East. It's a test of whether the 21st century international order can contain a multipolar war that blends conventional military force, economic warfare, and legal system manipulation. For viewers of this channel, the key is to track three things in the coming weeks. First, how Iran and the US respond to the Dubai tanker attack, whether this stays a single incident or becomes a pattern of attacks on Gulf shipping. Second, whether Israel's Supreme Court blocks or waters down the death penalty law, and how Palestinian groups and international institutions react. And third, how oil prices and global stock markets absorb the rising risk that the Gulf War is far from over.